Welcome to the Deep Dive, ready to plunge into some fascinating source material. Today we're diving into something a little more, risque.
Ooh, la la. Color me intrigued. What's on the agenda?
Well, today we're taking on the Amazon product page for Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 1, the Kindle edition.
Okay.
And our mission. It's to decode not just this anthology, but try to get a glimpse into the evolving world of women's erotica as a whole.
I like it. Sounds like this deep dive could reveal some interesting insights into how women's erotica is pushing boundaries, maybe even challenging societal norms.
Exactly. And right off the bat, you see that emphasis on pushing boundaries with the editor, Rachel Kramer Bussel. She's not just an editor, though. She's written for big names like Cosmo and Glamour. And get this, she's even taught erotica writing workshops. What do you make of that background, especially in relation to this anthology?
That's really interesting. It kind of suggests this unique blend of mainstream appeal and niche expertise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, her experience with those big magazines hints at an understanding of what a wider female audience really connects with.
For sure.
But then her erotica background, that brings a depth of knowledge about the genre's nuances. So you kind of have both sides covered.
That's a great point. So she's not just picking stories for a small audience, but maybe trying to bridge the gap between mainstream and erotica.
Right, bringing erotica to the masses.
What I also find interesting is that the product description really emphasizes strong, nuanced female characters and diverse sexual experiences. It even uses the phrase, respects your mind, which seems to push back on that stereotype of erotica being purely physical.
Yeah, totally. It's like it flips the script on what people might expect.
Yeah.
It suggests that these stories aren't just about, the physical stuff. They actually delve into the complexities of women's inner lives, their fantasies, and how much agency they have in pursuing those fantasies.
Absolutely. And I'm also struck by the variety of stories hinted at in just the titles and descriptions. We've got, for example, The Ropes, which seems to be diving into BDSM. There's Starstruck, exploring, celebrity worship. And even Waiting to Pee set in, you guessed it, a porta potty. So what does this range tell you about what the anthology might be trying to do?
Diversity, for sure. It's like a deliberate attempt to shatter that stereotypical mold of what women's erotica is. It's not just catering to one specific fantasy or desire, It's presenting a whole spectrum of experiences and showcasing the multifaceted nature of female sexuality.
And that ties into the theme of diversity, which I don't know if you noticed is mentioned multiple times on the page. Representation seems to be a key focus.
Absolutely. And that's a huge development in the world of erotica, which has, let's be honest, historically been criticized for its lack of inclusivity.
Yeah.
But this anthology, with its range of characters, sexualities, and scenarios, seems to be addressing that head on.
So it's not just pushing boundaries in terms of the content, but also in terms of who gets to tell these stories. And, more importantly, whose desires are being represented. That's a powerful statement.
Totally. It suggests that the anthology isn't just trying to, entertain. It's also trying to spark a real conversation about female sexuality and all its layers and diversity.
Before we get too deep into individual story descriptions, I'm curious about the writing style itself. Some reviewers are praising it as, beautiful and engaging, while others find it uneven. How do we reconcile those seemingly conflicting viewpoints?
Ooh, that's a great question and a common one with anthologies. With so many different authors, each bringing their own unique voice, you're almost always going to get variations in quality and reader preference.
So not a flaw with the anthology itself, but maybe more of a reflection of the diverse voices being included.
Exactly. And I think it actually speaks to the editor's willingness to take risks and push boundaries by including different styles. Instead of sticking to a formula that's safe and predictable.
Right. Okay, let's actually zoom in on some of these intriguing story titles. We've already mentioned The Ropes and its potential foray into the world of BDSM.
Yeah.
What other titles jump out at you, and what might they tell us about the anthology's overall themes?
Starstruck is really interesting to me. It suggests an exploration of fantasy and desire, but specifically as they relate to celebrity culture.
Okay.
Which I think raises questions about how our own identities and aspirations get tangled up with the people we admire, the ones we see from afar.
That's a fascinating angle. And then there's Two Doms for Dinner. That one seems to be getting into a less conventional power dynamic.
It does, doesn't it? Even the title itself is challenging traditional ideas about female sexuality and submissiveness.
Yeah.
It suggests that women can find pleasure and even empowerment in all sorts of ways, even those that might be seen as taboo by society's standards.
Definitely a story that seems to be pushing boundaries and getting readers to confront their own preconceptions about what female desire really is.
For sure. And that feels like a recurring theme in this anthology, like a deliberate effort to disrupt expectations and broaden the definition of what women's erotica can be.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about Flying Solo, which seems to be all about celebrating female masturbation and self-love. It's a crucial inclusion because it normalizes something that's totally natural and healthy for women, but is often, stigmatized.
For sure. It challenges the shame and secrecy that often surrounds female self-pleasure.
Yeah.
By showcasing a woman who's confident and comfortable with her own body, it's making a statement. It's about owning your sexuality and embracing pleasure on your own terms.
Okay, so we've got stories exploring BDSM, celebrity worship, unconventional power dynamics, and self-love. It's a pretty wide mix. What would you say are some of the overarching themes that you see emerging from these choices?
I'd say one of the most prominent themes is female agency and empowerment. These stories feature women who are making their own choices about their sexual experiences, women who are in control of their bodies and their desires. It's a far cry from the, passive, submissive female characters that have often been the norm in erotica.
That's a really important point. It's not about being passive. It's about reclaiming female sexuality and really presenting women as active participants in their own pleasure.
Exactly. And it's all tied to the idea of diversity, too. Not just diversity of representation, but diversity in the range of desires and experiences being explored. These stories are saying there's no one right way to be a woman or to experience your sexuality. It's about embracing that full spectrum of human desire.
And we can't forget about waiting to pee, set in that porta potty.
Right.
Why do you think that story in particular is catching people's attention?
I think it's the sheer unexpectedness of the setting. It's just so far removed from the romanticized environments we usually associate with erotica. It's a bold choice that challenges our ideas about where desire can show up and how.
It also suggests a sense of humor, which is something we haven't really touched on.
Right.
How important do you think humor is in this anthology?
I think it's actually crucial. It helps break down any barriers of discomfort that some readers, especially those new to women's erotica, might be feeling.
Right.
Plus, it adds another layer to the characters and their experiences. It reminds us that sexuality can be fun and playful, not just serious and intense all the time.
It's like, hey, we can talk about this stuff without being overly serious or preachy.
Exactly. There's a lightness, a self-awareness that runs through the whole collection, which I find really refreshing. And, it ties back to that theme of empowerment, too. Owning your sexuality with a sense of humor and confidence.
So it's not just pushing boundaries with content, but also with the tone and the overall approach.
Yeah.
This anthology seems to be redefining what women's erotica can even be.
Absolutely. It's breaking down walls and making space for a more nuanced and multifaceted understanding of female sexuality, a real conversation starter, and a celebration of desire in all its diverse forms.
Now, we've talked a lot about the anthology's goals and themes, but what about the woman behind it all, Rachel Kramer Bussel? What can we glean from her background, from the way she presents this anthology, about her personal vision?
Well, her experience as both a mainstream writer and an erotica expert really points to a desire to bridge those two worlds. She's trying to make erotica more accessible to a wider audience without shying away from its complexity and its power.
So she's not just focused on a niche market, but maybe actually expanding who reads and enjoys erotica.
Exactly. And her emphasis on diversity, both in the stories and the authors themselves, suggests a real commitment to inclusivity and representation. She's not just telling one kind of story or showcasing one type of woman. It's a platform for a multitude of voices and experiences.
It's like she's saying that women's erotica isn't a monolith. It's more like a vibrant tapestry woven from all these different threads.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a testament to her vision and passion for the genre.
Now, before we move on to reader reactions, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about Rachel Kramer Bussel's background in journalism. How do you think that might have influenced her approach to editing this anthology?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That journalistic background probably instilled a strong commitment to accuracy, fact-checking, attention to detail. And I think that could translate to a real focus on realism and authenticity in the stories she chose for this collection.
So instead of just seeking out the most, shocking or titillating material, She's looking for stories that feel real, that have emotional depth.
Exactly. And that could explain why some reviewers praise the writing for being engaging and thought-provoking.
Right. It's more than just surface level.
It suggests these stories are about more than just fantasy. They're about exploring real human experiences and emotions, but through the lens of erotica.
So bringing that journalistic lens to a genre that's often seen as purely fictional, purely escapist?
Precisely. And that blend of realism and fantasy could be one of the things that makes this anthology so unique and compelling.
Okay, let's dive into the reader reactions. We know overall reviews on Amazon are pretty positive, but let's unpack that a bit. What are people actually responding to?
One thing that pops up a lot is this appreciation for the sheer variety of stories.
Okay.
Readers love that the anthology has such a diverse range of characters, settings, and themes. It seems like Bussel really nailed it in terms of curating something that resonates with a broad audience.
And that really speaks to her ability to balance her own vision with an understanding of what readers are looking for.
Absolutely. It's not about her imposing her taste. It's about her curating a collection that truly reflects the desires and interests of her audience.
And what's interesting is that while several reviewers mention, the steamy content, which is to be expected with erotica,
Right.
they're also pointing out the quality of the writing and the depth of the characters.
That's key. These stories aren't just about, gratuitous sex. They're delving into the emotional and psychological complexities of desire, relationships, and what it means to be a woman.
It seems like people are connecting with these stories on a deeper level.
They are. And that speaks to how successful the anthology is at pushing the boundaries of the genre.
Yeah.
And the positive reception also suggests that there's this growing audience out there for intelligent, nuanced, empowering erotica.
Of course, not all the reviews are glowing praise. Some criticize the anthology for, uneven writing quality, pointing out that some stories are just more engaging and well-written than others. It's a common critique with anthologies, though.
It's true. With so many different writers contributing, it's hard to keep a consistent level of quality across the board.
So do you think that criticism is valid? Or is it more a result of the anthology's ambition to showcase all these different voices and styles?
It's tricky. On one hand, of course, readers will have different preferences and reactions to different writing styles. That's natural.
Sure.
But on the other hand, the editor does bear responsibility for the overall quality of the collection.
Right.
And in this case, I think Bussel has done a great job curating a diverse and thought-provoking anthology. The fact that there's even debate about the writing quality is a testament to the range of voices she's included.
So even the criticism, in a way, reflects the anthology's ambition and scope.
I think so. It reminds us that this isn't just a collection of safe, predictable stories.
Right.
Bussel's pushing boundaries, challenging readers, and that's going to lead to different responses.
And it seems like the reviewers who really appreciate the anthology's boldness and diversity are willing to look past those inconsistencies in writing style.
I think that's fair. They understand that the real strength of the anthology is in its overall vision, its commitment to exploring all the different facets of female sexuality.
Let's delve into some specific comments. One reader praised the anthology for its strong, nuanced female characters and his ability to, quote, titillate while respecting your mind.
That's really insightful. It captures what makes this anthology so unique.
Yeah.
It's not just about, showing sexual acts or portraying female desire in a simplistic way. It's about really getting into the complexities of women's lives, their fantasies, and the power they have to pursue those fantasies.
Another reviewer commented on the wide swath of writers included, praising Bussel for showcasing a diverse range of voices and perspectives.
That's so important. Representation in literature matters, especially in a genre that has historically been dominated by such a narrow range of viewpoints.
And it also speaks to Bussel's commitment to fostering new talent, in the world of erotica writing.
For sure. By giving a platform to both established and up-and-coming authors, she's helping shape the future of the genre.
Now, some reviewers also highlighted those humorous elements we talked about. One reader even described the collection as joyous and heart-thumping, which suggests that the humor is not just effective, it's essential to the experience.
I agree. Humor is often overlooked as a powerful tool in erotica, but it can be incredibly effective in creating intimacy and connection with the reader.
Right.
It also helps to break down any discomfort and make the subject matter feel more approachable.
And as we've discussed, it can be a really effective way to subvert stereotypes and challenge norms.
Totally. By using humor to address sensitive topics, both Bussel and the authors create a space for open and honest dialogue about desire, pleasure, and the complexities of human relationships.
One reviewer even called the anthology a revelation, which suggests that it's really challenging their preconceived notions about women's erotica.
That's powerful. It speaks to the anthology's ability to push boundaries and expand the very definition of the genre.
And it seems like people are not only enjoying the stories, but also really engaging with them, thinking about the themes and ideas.
That's the dream, right? That's what any anthology hopes to achieve. Spark conversation and inspire new ways of thinking.
Now let's talk about the less positive reviews. Some people criticize the uneven writing quality, which is a fair point, as we've discussed. But even these critical reviews often acknowledge the anthology's strengths.
They do. One reviewer, for example, while critiquing the pacing and depth of some stories, still praised the collection for its, quote, genuine creative writing and its willingness to explore unconventional themes.
So even those who had issues with parts of the anthology, they still appreciated the overall vision and the effort to push boundaries.
It speaks volumes about the impact Bussel's made with this collection. It's not perfect, but it's bold, it's thought-provoking, and it's definitely sparked a conversation about the evolving landscape of women's erotica.
So there might be some bumps along the way, but for many readers, the journey seems to be a worthwhile one.
Totally. And those bumps, those inconsistencies, there may be a necessary part of the journey. They reflect that commitment to diversity and that willingness to take risks.
Now, let's zoom out for a second and talk about women's erotica as a genre. What does this anthology and the reactions to it tell us about the current state of the genre?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways is this growing focus on diversity and inclusion.
Okay.
This anthology is a perfect example. It features a range of characters, sexualities, and scenarios that actually reflect the reality of women's lives and desires.
It's a far cry from that stereotypical image of women's erotica.
Yeah.
All submissive housewives and dominant alpha males.
Exactly. The genre is evolving. It's becoming more representative of the diverse experiences and preferences of real women.
Another thing that stood out is the focus on female agency and empowerment.
Yes.
The stories in this anthology celebrate women who are confident in their desires, who take control of their sexual experiences, and who refuse to be defined by what society expects of them.
It's such an important shift. For too long, women's sexuality has been portrayed as either timid and shameful or overly aggressive and unrealistic.
Right.
But these stories offer a more nuanced and empowering view.
They show that women can be both sensual and strong.
Yes.
And that they have every right to explore their sexuality on their own terms.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to note the growing acceptance of BDSM within women's erotica.
Yeah.
This anthology doesn't shy away from those themes. It actually presents them in a way that's both respectful and, titillating.
Oh, sure. BDSM isn't this taboo topic anymore.
Yeah.
It's increasingly being explored as a legitimate form of sexual expression for women.
And it's a sign that the genre is becoming more open-minded and inclusive.
Absolutely. There's a growing understanding that women can find pleasure and empowerment in all sorts of ways, and that those ways shouldn't be judged or shamed.
So based on this deep dive, it seems like women's erotica is in a really exciting place right now.
It is.
It's evolving, it's diversifying, and it's becoming more empowering.
I couldn't agree more. This anthology is proof of that.
Yes.
It's a testament to the creativity and boldness of the writers and editors who are shaping the future of the genre.
A future I'm definitely eager to explore further.
Me too. There's so much potential for storytelling and exploration in this genre. I'm excited to see where it goes next.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go back to what makes this anthology so compelling. We've talked about the diversity of characters and themes, but I think it's worth highlighting a few stories that really stand out.
Absolutely. One that jumps to mind is The Ropes. Remember we talked about it earlier, how it dives into the complexities of a BDSM relationship?
Yeah.
It's so beautifully written, and it explores themes of power, trust, and surrender in a way that's both sensual and really makes you think.
Starstruck, with its exploration of celebrity worship and fantasy, is another one.
Oh, yeah.
It raises those interesting questions about where reality ends and desire begins, and how our fantasies about these public figures can get all tangled up in our own identities and aspirations.
Right, and then you've got Two Doms for Dinner, which, like the title suggests, features a woman who finds pleasure in submitting to two dominant partners. It's bold, it's unconventional, and it challenges all those traditional notions of power dynamics in relationships.
These stories, along with the others in the collection, really demonstrate the anthology's commitment to pushing those boundaries and exploring all the different aspects of female sexuality.
They do. And they highlight how the anthology can be both entertaining and intellectually stimulating.
Yeah.
It's not just about titillation. It's about engaging with these complex themes and ideas, but through the lens of erotica.
Absolutely. And we have to mention Flying Solo again. Celebrating female masturbation and self-love is such an important inclusion.
It really is.
Because it normalizes something that, as we said, is so often stigmatized.
It's a powerful statement about the importance of owning your body and your pleasure on your own terms.
Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
That story set in a porta potty. Waiting to pee.
Oh.
Bold choice. Definitely sparked some conversations among reviewers.
Some might find it shocking, maybe even off-putting.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's brilliant. It shows how the anthology embraces humor and challenges where we think desire can manifest.
It reminds us that sexuality isn't always glamorous or romantic. It can be messy, unexpected, even humorous.
And sometimes it pops up in the most unlikely places.
That's a great point. Now, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, but before we move on, I'd like to leave our listeners with something to think about.
I love a good cliffhanger. Lay it on me.
Okay, so we've talked about how this anthology challenges norms, empowers women, and really broadens that definition of erotica. But what about its potential impact beyond the page? Could reading stories like these actually change how we think and talk about female sexuality in the real world?
Now, that is a fascinating question, and one that deserves some serious exploration. I guess we'll have to dive deeper in the next part to find out. That is a fascinating question, and one that I think really gets to the heart of what makes this anthology so compelling. It's not just about entertainment, it's about sparking a dialogue, and maybe even shifting those cultural perceptions.
It's interesting because when you think about traditional media and its impact, we often see a disconnect between how things are represented and reality. But with erotica, especially women's erotica, there's this potential for those lines to blur.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Because erotica deals with these intimate and often taboo subjects. It has the power to challenge those deep-seated beliefs and assumptions that other genres maybe can't touch.
Exactly. And when those challenges come from a place of female empowerment and diverse representation, like they do in this anthology, it makes you wonder about the ripple effect. How it might change how women see themselves, their desires, and even their place in the world.
It's like planting seeds of change, but in the fertile ground of imagination. Who knows what could grow from there?
Okay, so we've established that this anthology could have a real impact beyond just reading it. But let's get practical. If someone's listening to this and they're intrigued by this idea of erotica as a tool for empowerment and self-discovery, where would they even begin?
Well, the answer is surprisingly simple. Start with this anthology.
Okay.
Rachel Kramer Bussel has curated a collection that's both accessible and challenging, diverse and thought-provoking. It's a great starting point.
So good entry point for someone new to the genre or maybe a little hesitant?
Absolutely. There's such a range of styles and themes that there's truly something for everyone. Plus, the focus on female agency and diversity makes it a safe and empowering space to explore.
Now, I know we touched on this before, but I want to go back to Rachel Kramer Bussel's background and how that might have shaped her approach to this anthology.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle. Her experience as a journalist, a writer, and an erotica instructor gives her this unique set of skills that are perfect for this project.
I'm really interested in that journalism angle.
Yeah.
Did she approach this anthology with that same commitment to accuracy and realism that we see in her nonfiction work?
That's a sharp observation. And I think you can see it in the way she talks about the anthology and the stories within it. She uses language that's both evocative and informative. It's like she wants to present these stories not just as fantasies, but as glimpses into real human experiences.
And that circles back to the idea that erotica can be more than just entertainment.
Right.
It can be a way to explore those complicated themes and emotions, to challenge norms, to connect with ourselves and others on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And I think Rachel Kramer Bussel understands that she's not just curating a collection of stories. She's curating an experience, a journey of self-discovery.
So to our listener, if you're at all curious about erotica being both pleasurable and transformative, I encourage you to dive into this anthology. Be open-minded. Be ready to be surprised.
And don't be afraid to challenge those assumptions and preconceived notions you might have about the genre. Who knows? You might discover something new about yourself and the world around you.
Now, before we wrap up this part, I want to touch on something we haven't fully explored. The reader reviews.
Ah, the voice of the people.
Yeah.
I always find it fascinating to see how readers respond to any work of art, especially one that's as personal and potentially provocative as erotica.
And in this case, the reviews are overwhelmingly positive.
Mm.
But what I find most interesting is how much thought people are putting into them.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just I liked it or I didn't like it. People are really digging into the themes, the characters, and the overall impact.
That shows you how powerful these stories are. They're not just fleeting moments of pleasure. They're sparking real conversations, challenging those assumptions, and giving people new ways to think about female sexuality.
And it speaks to Rachel Kramer Bussel's skills as an editor, too.
Right.
She's created a collection that really resonates with readers, one that invites them to be part of a larger conversation about desire, pleasure, and empowerment.
You know, one of the most frequent things I've seen in the reviews is this appreciation for the diversity of voices and experiences in the anthology.
Wow.
People are excited about the inclusion of characters from different backgrounds with different sexualities and different desires.
And that's a big deal. It reflects this evolution we're seeing in women's erotica. It's not this niche genre anymore dominated by one perspective. It's becoming more inclusive, more representative of the real world, and ultimately more empowering for women from all walks of life.
And that inclusivity goes beyond just the characters. It includes the authors themselves.
Right.
Rachel Kramer Bussel has intentionally showcased both established and up-and-coming writers, making sure that a wider range of voices get heard.
That's a sign of a true visionary editor. She's not just curating a collection, she's building a community, fostering new talent, and shaping the future of the genre.
And that future is looking bright. The response to this anthology proves there's a real hunger for this kind of intelligent, nuanced, and empowering erotica.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time to be both a reader and a writer of women's erotica.
It really is, and it's a testament to the power of stories to challenge those norms, spark those conversations, and create a world that's more inclusive and accepting.
Now, before we move on to the final part of our dive, I want to address one criticism that's come up in some reviews.
Yeah.
The uneven writing quality.
Yeah, it's a common thing with anthologies, especially when you have a wide range of authors.
And while I get the concern, I think it's important to look at that criticism in the context of the anthology's goals.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Kramer Bussel has said she wanted to showcase a diversity of voices and styles, and that means some stories will resonate more strongly with certain readers than others.
That's true. It's a good reminder that art is subjective. What one reader finds brilliant, another might find just okay.
Exactly. And I think it actually speaks to the anthology's boldness that it's willing to take those risks and push those boundaries.
Yeah.
Not every story is going to be a masterpiece, but that's part of what makes the collection so exciting and unpredictable.
And it reminds us that even within a genre like erotica, there's a huge range of writing styles and approaches.
Right.
Some stories will be lyrical and poetic. Others will be more explicit and to the point.
And that variety is what makes it so engaging, like a sampler platter offering a taste of all these different flavors.
In the end, it's up to each reader to decide what flavors they like best.
Okay, now I know we've already talked about some specific stories, but there's one I want to highlight. It really gets at the heart of female empowerment and challenging those societal norms. Two Doms for Dinner.
Great choice. Even the title is so provocative and intriguing, it immediately suggests something that goes against those typical expectations about female sexuality.
Exactly. And the story itself doesn't disappoint. It features a woman who is completely confident and assertive in what she wants, and she finds pleasure and fulfillment in a dynamic that some might find taboo.
It's a powerful example of women reclaiming their sexuality and deciding what pleasure means for them.
And it reminds us there's no one right way to experience desire. What's liberating for one person might not be for another.
And that's okay. This anthology celebrates that. That's what makes it so great. It's not about telling women what they should or shouldn't enjoy. It's about creating space for exploration and self-discovery.
Now, I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about the bigger picture, the cultural context surrounding this anthology. We're living in a time when women are speaking up more than ever before about their experiences, their desires, and their right to define their own sexuality.
That's so true. And this anthology reflects that shift.
Yeah.
It shows that women aren't going to be silenced or shamed for their sexuality anymore. They're demanding to be heard, to be seen, and to be celebrated for who they are.
And this anthology gives them a platform to do just that.
Exactly. It's a space for women to explore those fantasies, their desires, and their power in a way that's honest and unapologetic.
And it's doing all of that in a way that's both entertaining and intellectually stimulating.
It really is. It's not just about titillation. It's about starting conversations, challenging norms, and ultimately making the world more inclusive and accepting.
Now, before we go to the last part of our deep dive, I want to talk about one more element that's crucial to understanding this anthology's impact, the role of humor.
Yes, the power of laughter. It's so often overlooked, but it can be such an important tool for breaking down those barriers, challenging taboos, and making those difficult topics easier to approach.
And in this anthology, humor is used so well.
It really is.
It's not just there for cheap laughs. It's woven into the stories, adding depth, complexity, and a sense of lightness to how it explores female sexuality.
You know, one of the best examples is Waiting to Pee, the one we've talked about that's set in a porta potty.
Oh, yeah.
That scenario could have easily gone for shock value, but instead it's handled with such a great sense of humor. The result is a story that's both surprising and delightful.
And that humor doesn't take away from the story's eroticism or its exploration of female desire. If anything, it makes it stronger.
It does. It builds intimacy and connection with the reader. It's like the author saying, hey, we can talk about this stuff without being too serious about it.
And that's incredibly empowering. It lets women own their sexuality with humor and confidence without shame or judgment.
It reminds us that pleasure can be found in the most unexpected places, and that laughter can be a powerful aphrodisiac.
Now, before we move to the final section of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about.
Ooh, I do love a good cliffhanger. What is it?
Well, we've discussed the anthology's themes, the editor's vision, the reactions, and the potential impact it could have. But the question that keeps coming back to me is this. What does it actually mean to truly own your sexuality?
Ooh, that's a good one. That question goes way beyond this anthology. It gets at the heart of what it means to be human.
Exactly. And it's a question I think deserves more exploration in our final section.
That's a question that could fuel a whole other deep dive, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe we should do that sometime. But for now, let's try to unpack it with what we know about this anthology in the world of women's erotica.
Yeah, good idea. So what does it mean to truly own one's sexuality? Is it about freedom of choice? Is it about shedding those societal expectations? Or is it something deeper, something more personal?
I think it's all of those, honestly, and probably even more. It's about recognizing that our sexuality is a fundamental piece of who we are. It's not something to be ashamed of or to hide. It's something to embrace, to explore, to celebrate.
And not about conforming to what's considered normal or acceptable. It's about figuring those things out for yourself, based on your own desires and experiences.
Exactly. And this anthology really showcases what that ownership can look like. We see these women exploring all kinds of desires and fantasies, engaging in power dynamics that turn traditional gender roles on their head, and just owning their sexuality with this sense of confidence and joy.
It's about recognizing that pleasure isn't bad. It's not something you have to earn. It's a birthright, something we deserve to experience fully and without needing to apologize for it.
And that's a message that's so important, especially for women who for so long have been told to suppress their desires and to feel ashamed of their sexuality.
This anthology is like a pushback against that.
It is. It celebrates female pleasure, reclaims the female body, and shows the strength of women who refuse to be defined by what society expects.
Now, going back to what we talked about earlier about this anthology's impact beyond the reader, do you think reading stories like these can actually shift how we view and talk about female sexuality on a larger scale?
I think it has to. When we engage with art that challenges us, that expands our understanding, it changes us. It can ripple out into our beliefs and actions.
So it's more than just a fun read. It's about education, empathy, and, yes, empowerment.
Exactly. By reading stories that show women as complex beings with a whole range of desires and experiences, we start to break down those stereotypes and taboos that have limited how we think about female sexuality for, honestly, far too long.
And that leads to more open conversations, less shame and judgment, and hopefully a world that's more equitable and fulfilling for everyone.
It's about creating a culture where women are free to explore their sexuality without fear, where pleasure is celebrated and differences are embraced.
So not just changing individual minds, but the very culture itself.
Exactly. And art, like this anthology, can be a powerful tool for that. It's a catalyst for change, a spark that ignites a whole movement.
So back to that initial question, what does it mean to truly own one's sexuality?
Well, it's a tough one, no easy answers, but we've gotten some good insights from this anthology.
We've seen that it's about embracing those desires without shame, defining what pleasure means to you, exploring the full spectrum of human experience.
Recognizing that sexuality isn't fixed, it's fluid, it evolves.
And it's about using your voice, using creativity to challenge norms, and work towards a more just and equitable world.
So to our listener, we challenge you. What does owning your sexuality look like for you? How can you embrace those desires, challenge those expectations, and help create a culture that celebrates pleasure in all its forms?
This has been The Deep Dive, a journey into the world of women's erotica, and a look at what it means to own your sexuality. Until next time, keep those minds curious, those conversations going, and those desires burning bright.